Tensions between the United States and Venezuela are escalating dangerously. What began as a series of diplomatic disagreements has now evolved into a high-stakes standoff, with both nations unwilling to back down. The world is watching as the situation grows more volatile by the day. In a bold move, America has deployed a significant military force near Venezuela, led by the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest and most advanced warship. This formidable carrier, accompanied by a powerful fleet of escort ships, now patrols the Caribbean waters just off Venezuela's coast, sending a clear message of strength and readiness. This deployment signals a serious intent to confront perceived threats from the region. The presence of advanced warships and aircraft on high alert demonstrates that the United States is prepared to act decisively if provoked. Military commanders are closely monitoring every development, ready to respond at a moment's notice. The U.S. has already conducted military strikes, targeting boats near the Venezuelan coast, claiming they were involved in drug trafficking. These operations are part of a broader effort to curb illegal activities, but they have also raised concerns about the potential for accidental escalation and unintended consequences. These actions have heightened fears of a larger conflict that could destabilize the region. Local communities are on edge, with many residents worried about their safety and the possibility of war. Protests have erupted in several Latin American cities as people voice their opposition to military intervention and call for peace. Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, views this as a direct threat and has ordered his military to high alert, preparing for a potential invasion. Troops are mobilizing in the capital and along the coast, while tanks and armored vehicles are positioned to defend key locations. The Venezuelan government insists it will not be intimidated and is ready to resist any foreign aggression. Accusations fly from both sides, each blaming the other for the standoff. U.S. officials argue that their actions are necessary to protect regional security and combat criminal networks, while Venezuelan leaders denounce what they see as an act of imperialism. The United Nations has become a battleground for heated debates, with global powers weighing in on the crisis. A small misstep could ignite a full-scale war, with the world watching anxiously. Every decision is fraught with risk, and the margin for error is razor-thin. Civilians, both in Venezuela and abroad, are glued to their screens, hoping for a peaceful resolution, but fearing the worst. This military buildup is the culmination of years of deteriorating relations between the U.S. and Venezuela. Decades of sanctions, political disputes, and economic crises have brought the two nations to this critical juncture. Each new incident adds fuel to the fire, making compromise increasingly difficult. Sending such a massive warship is a dramatic step, showcasing U.S. military might to pressure the Venezuelan government. The sheer scale of the deployment is meant to intimidate, but it also risks provoking a dangerous response. Both sides are now locked in a tense game of brinkmanship with no clear end in sight. However, this show of force is unpredictable and risky for all involved. Military experts warn that even a minor incident could spiral out of control, drawing in neighboring countries and destabilizing the entire region. As the world holds its breath, the hope remains that diplomacy will prevail before it's too late. The United States claims that its growing military presence in the Caribbean is primarily aimed at combating the persistent threat of drug trafficking. With Navy ships and Coast Guard vessels patrolling the waters, the official narrative is that these operations are designed to intercept illegal narcotics before they reach American shores. The U.S. government points to the vast quantities of drugs flowing through the region as justification for this show of force, arguing that such measures are necessary to disrupt the operations of international drug cartels. At the same time, U.S. officials have repeatedly accused Venezuela of having deep ties to some of the world's most powerful and dangerous cartels. They allege that elements within the Venezuelan government are complicit in facilitating the drug trade, either by turning a blind eye or by actively participating in trafficking networks. These accusations have been used to justify increased scrutiny and pressure on the Maduro regime. By framing the issue as a military challenge rather than simply a law enforcement problem, the U.S. is able to deploy troops, ships, and advanced surveillance technology to the region. This approach allows for a much broader range of actions, including intelligence gathering, interdiction missions, and even joint operations with regional allies. It marks a significant escalation from traditional anti-drug efforts which have typically relied on police and DEA agents. However, this strategy has not gone unchallenged. Critics, including human rights organizations and foreign policy experts, question whether such a heavy military response is truly warranted for what is fundamentally a criminal issue. They argue that deploying warships and military aircraft seems excessive, and warn that it risks inflaming tensions in an already volatile region. Many of these critics suggest that the real motivation behind the operation is political, not just about drugs. They believe the US is using the war on drugs as a pretext to increase pressure on President Nicolas Maduro's government, hoping to weaken his grip on power and encourage regime change in Venezuela. Despite these concerns, US officials maintain that the operation is essential for protecting American communities from the devastating impact of illegal drugs. They point to the ongoing opioid crisis and the rise in overdose deaths as evidence that stronger action is needed to cut off the supply at its source. President Trump, in particular, has been vocal about his administration's commitment to fighting international crime. He has repeatedly asserted his authority to take bold steps, framing the military deployment as a necessary escalation in the global fight against drug traffickers and criminal organizations. This shift toward a military response marks a departure from previous strategies, which relied more heavily on economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and legal actions against individuals linked to the Venezuelan government. The use of military assets signals a new, more aggressive phase in US policy toward Venezuela and the broader region. By involving the military so directly, the US blurs the traditional line between law enforcement and warfare. This sets a potentially dangerous precedent, as it could normalize the use of military force in situations that have historically been handled by police and courts. Many observers worry that this approach could be used to justify similar interventions elsewhere, under the broad and often ambiguous banner of fighting drugs or crime. The world is watching closely, as the consequences of this strategy may extend far beyond Venezuela's borders. President Nicolas Maduro has forcefully condemned recent US military actions, describing them as a direct threat to Venezuela's sovereignty and stability. In a series of passionate speeches, Maduro has accused the United States of interfering in Venezuelan affairs, warning that such actions could have dangerous consequences for the entire region. Government officials have echoed Maduro's statements, labeling the US maneuvers as clear acts of aggression. Across Caracas, protests have erupted, with citizens holding signs denouncing American intervention and calling for respect of Venezuela's independence. In Parliament, lawmakers have debated emergency measures, emphasizing the need to defend the nation from foreign threats. Maduro insists that the US is fabricating justifications for war, claiming their ultimate goal is to topple his government and install a regime more favorable to American interests. State media has amplified these concerns, broadcasting reports of alleged US plans for regime change and warning citizens to remain vigilant. In response, Maduro has placed Venezuela's military on high alert, ordering nationwide defense drills and mobilizing troops. Tanks and armored vehicles have been seen in training exercises as the government seeks to demonstrate its readiness to defend the country against any external attack. At the same time, Maduro is working to rally the Venezuelan people, urging unity in the face of what he calls American imperialism. Large rallies have taken place in the capital, with citizens waving national flags and chanting slogans of resistance. Maduro has appeared alongside both military leaders and civilians, emphasizing the importance of national solidarity. On the diplomatic front, Maduro has turned to the United Nations, delivering speeches that denounce US military strikes as violations of international law. Venezuelan diplomats have lobbied the Security Council, seeking global condemnation of American actions and support for Venezuela's right to self-determination. Despite the rising tensions, Maduro continues to call for dialogue and a peaceful resolution to the crisis. He has urged the international community to mediate and pressure the US to abandon its aggressive stance, hoping that diplomatic efforts can prevent further escalation and bring about a negotiated settlement. Maduro's response is deeply influenced by a long history of mistrust between Venezuela and the United States. He frames the current situation as part of a larger struggle, portraying Venezuela as a nation standing up to a powerful adversary. By invoking past conflicts and historical grievances, Maduro seeks to strengthen national resolve and present his government as the defender of Venezuelan sovereignty. The U.S. military buildup near Venezuela has drawn global concern and criticism. The United Nations warns of potential instability, urging diplomacy over force. Latin American nations, while critical of Maduro, oppose U.S. military intervention, fearing regional consequences. A war could lead to a massive refugee crisis, straining neighboring countries. Despite criticism, the U.S. has allies supporting its stance on Venezuela, though they prefer sanctions over military action. The international community calls for restraint and peaceful negotiations to avoid a humanitarian disaster. The decision to use military force near Venezuela has sparked debate in the U.S. about presidential authority. Legal experts question if the president can order such strikes without Congress, as the Constitution grants war-declaring power to Congress. Lawmakers from both parties express concern, feeling bypassed in the decision-making process. The War Powers Resolution requires the president to consult Congress before military action, which critics say was ignored. The administration defends its actions, claiming the president acted within his rights to address national security threats. This debate touches on fundamental principles of American democracy and the separation of powers. Inside Venezuela, a bitter political struggle divides the nation. The U.S. and others do not recognize Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president, citing a disputed election. The opposition, led by Edmundo Gonzalez, claims rightful leadership, creating competing power claims. The U.S. military pressure aims to influence this internal conflict, hoping to weaken Maduro's support. The strategy relies on creating cracks within the regime, but it risks uniting Venezuelans against perceived foreign aggression. The opposition needs U.S. support, but must avoid appearing as foreign puppets. The impact of U.S. actions on Venezuela's politics remains uncertain. The U.S. strategy against Venezuela includes covert operations by the CIA to undermine Maduro's government. These secret actions likely involve intelligence gathering and supporting opposition groups. This hidden strategy adds pressure, combining visible military threats with efforts to destabilize the regime. The threat of further military action, including potential ground strikes, raises the stakes. Venezuela's government uses these threats to garner international sympathy, accusing the U.S. of plotting against it. The combination of military pressure and covert operations creates a volatile situation. Amidst political tensions, Venezuela faces a severe humanitarian crisis. The economy has collapsed, with hyperinflation making basic necessities unaffordable. Millions struggle for food and medicine, leading to a public health emergency. This crisis has forced millions to flee, burdening neighboring countries. The military standoff threatens to worsen this tragedy, potentially disrupting aid and increasing refugee numbers. The focus on military solutions overshadows the urgent humanitarian needs of Venezuelans. The U.S. and Venezuela are on a collision course, risking a devastating war. The current path of military escalation makes a peaceful solution harder to find. De-escalation is critical, requiring both sides to engage in dialogue. The international community must push for a peaceful settlement and address the humanitarian crisis. Aid must reach those in need, and the political conflict should not overshadow human suffering. A lasting solution must come from within Venezuela, through an inclusive political process. The choices made now will determine whether the region finds peace or descends into conflict.